Something ancient still stirs in the misty hills of the Celtic world. Voices that once guided kings, haunted villages, and demanded fear or worship. Their names were whispered, never spoken aloud. Some brought fortune, others brought ruin, but all were real to those who believed. What kind of beings ruled the invisible world of the Celts? Let's start with the big picture. The Celts didn't separate natural from supernatural. They lived in one connected reality. Gods walked among mortals. Spirits inhabited rivers and trees. The dead weren't gone. They simply moved to another layer of existence. Now, imagine standing in ancient Ireland on a misty morning. The fog rolls thick over the hills. According to Celtic belief, you're standing at a threshold. The mist itself marks a crossing point between worlds. Both worlds existed simultaneously, occupying the same space, separated only by a veil so thin you could sometimes glimpse through it. The other world had many names across Celtic lands. In Wales, they called it Andabuin. The Irish knew it as Tir na Nog, which translates to the land of youth. Some spoke of Mag Mel, the joyful plain. Different names, same essential concept. A parallel realm of eternal beauty, abundance and youth. But here's what makes Celtic belief unique. The other world wasn't heaven. It existed right here, right now, layered over the physical world like two sheets of glass pressed together. You could theoretically walk into it if you found the right entrance at the right moment. So where were these entrances? Lakes, rivers, and wells served as gateways. The Celts believed water had transformative power. When you looked into a still lake, you saw the sky reflected perfectly. Above and below merged. Ancient burial mounds and earthworks were another entry point. These mounds became known as seed. The word means both the mound itself and the spirits dwelling within. Stand beside Newgrange in Ireland, and you're standing at what the Celts considered a doorway. Liminal natural spaces completed the map. Caves, dense fog that erased landmarks, islands that appeared and disappeared. Anywhere the landscape became uncertain, the veil grew thin. Now consider timing. The veil thinned at specific moments. Nighttime, naturally. But especially during Samhain, celebrated from October 31st to November 1st. On that night, the barrier between worlds practically dissolved. Here's where Celtic belief gets really interesting. These spirits, gods, and otherworldly beings weren't sorted into good and evil categories. Original Celtic thought recognized balance. Spirits could help or harm. They weren't malicious by nature, nor were they benevolent guardians. This means the Celts approached the spirit world with respect, not worship or fear. Think of it like living near a powerful neighbor. You maintain good relations. You follow certain protocols. The spirits themselves came in countless varieties. Some were gods who had once shaped the world. Some were nature spirits tied to specific locations. Some were ancestors. The taxonomy wasn't rigid. What united all these beings was their role in maintaining cosmic balance. Celtic spirituality revolved around equilibrium. Light and dark, life and death, growth and decay. This shaped daily life in profound ways. You didn't just walk through a forest. You walked through a living, aware entity. Cutting down a tree without proper ritual was dangerous. Sacred groves appear in historical records across Celtic Europe. These weren't just pretty spots. They were temples, courtrooms, and meeting places with the divine all combined. Wells and springs received similar treatment. People left offerings, coins, pottery, small carved figures. They weren't trying to buy favors. they were maintaining relationship. This reciprocal relationship extended to human behavior. The concept of geese, a personal taboo or sacred obligation, grew from this worldview. If the spirit world gave you gifts or talents, you owed something back. Druids served as mediators in this complex system. They were judges, healers, teachers, astronomers, and advisors all combined. They studied for decades to learn the proper ways to communicate with spirits. This interconnected worldview meant the Celts never felt alone. Even in remote places, spiritual presences surrounded them. You weren't an isolated individual struggling against an indifferent universe. You were part of an aware cosmos. Next, we'll meet the spirits who inhabited the most fundamental elements of existence. Have you ever felt a forest watching you? The Celts would say you're absolutely right. Let's explore why they believed every element of nature held conscious awareness. Here's the core idea. The Celts saw spiritual presence in every natural element, not symbolically, literally. Earth, air, fire, and water each contained conscious spirits. These beings weren't gods in the grand sense. They were guardians of their specific domains. Every oak, every yew, every ancient grove housed spiritual presence. The Celts weren't worshipping trees. They recognized trees as living beings with their own awareness. Oak trees, with their strength and longevity, commanded special reverence. Yew trees held similar importance. They can live thousands of years. The Celts saw in yews a link to immortality, to the continuity of life beyond individual lifespans. Cutting any tree demanded ritual. You couldn't just grab an axe and start chopping. First, you explained your need to the tree spirit. You made an offering. You asked permission. Sacred groves took this principle further. Collections of trees created communities of spirits. These spaces became temples and gathering places. Archaeological evidence supports this. Excavations reveal votive offerings buried near ancient trees. Coins, jewelry, weapons. Some offerings show signs of ritual breaking before burial. Now move to water spirits. Every river, stream, lake, spring, and well had its guardian. Water spirits were often described as maidens who appeared near their particular waterway. They could heal diseases. They granted fertility. Consider what water meant to ancient people. It's life itself. You die without water in days. The Celts reasoned that such power required conscious guidance. Springs held special significance. Water emerging from earth crossed a boundary. Many springs had healing reputations. People traveled far to drink or bathe in certain spring waters. Rivers demanded even greater respect. Rivers shape landscapes. They can flood and destroy. The Celts left major offerings in rivers: swords, shields, elaborate metalwork. Lakes presented their own mystery. Still water reflects the sky. That mirror quality suggested deeper magic. Lakes were portals. Celtic water spirits weren't consistently benevolent. They could heal or harm. Their dual nature reflected water itself, life-giving and deadly. Air spirits were subtler, harder to pin down. Wind has no fixed location. The Celts associated air spirits with breath, with life force, with sudden inspiration. Fire spirits held special power. Fire transforms. It turns wood to ash, raw food to cooked. The Celts saw fire as a direct link to the divine. Sacred fires burned continuously in some locations. Samhain bonfires served multiple purposes. They honored fire spirits. They provided light against gathering darkness. People drove cattle between two bonfires for purification. Household hearth fires connected to this tradition. The hearth was your home's spiritual center. Its fire spirit protected your family. Now consider how these different elemental spirits interacted. The elements weren't isolated. Earth needed water. Water needed earth to contain it. Fire needed air to burn. Everything connected. Imagine a drought. The Celts wouldn't just see bad weather. They'd recognize a disrupted relationship. Something upset the water spirits. This interconnection shaped Celtic agriculture. You didn't just plant crops and hope for the best. You honored earth spirits with offerings at planting time. Each step involved a conscious relationship. The elemental spirits were the framework for understanding how nature works and humanity's place within it. Every element is conscious. Every force is aware. But not all spirits maintained balance. Some brought chaos and destruction. What happens when cosmic balance tips toward chaos? The Celts had answers, and they weren't comforting. Celtic mythology didn't use the word demon the way Christianity later would. Instead, they recognized destructive forces, chaotic entities, aligned with darkness and decay. Creation and destruction are both necessary. But some forces tip too far. Start with the Fomorians. These were primordial giants associated with chaos and blight. They represented nature's hostile side. Not the nurturing earth spirit, but the force that sends locusts and drought. Baler of the harsh evil eye stands as the most famous Fomorian. This giant possessed one enormous eye that killed anyone who looked at it. When opened, it released death itself. He led the Fomorians against the Tuatha De Danann. This was a cosmic struggle between creation and destruction. A prophecy foretold that Baler's grandson would kill him. So Baler imprisoned his daughter, but through trickery, the hero Lu was conceived. When Lu finally faced Baler, he used a sling to put a stone through the giant's deadly eye. Now meet Arlen the Burner. This fire spirit attacked Tara every Samhain for 23 years. He'd play supernatural music that put everyone to sleep, then breathe fire. The hero Fionn McCumhall defeated Arlen by pressing a magic spear's tip against his forehead to stay awake through the music. The Dullahan is a headless rider mounted on a black horse. He carries his own severed head. When the Dullahan speaks a name, that person immediately dies. What makes the Dullahan especially terrifying is his purposefulness. He's coming for specific people. The only traditional protection is gold. Another death spirit is Deag Dhu, which translates to red bloodsucker. She was a woman forced into marriage with a cruel man. After burial, she rose annually to seduce and drain men. Deag Dhu represents vengeance that transcends death. The only protection is piling stones on her grave. These dark entities shared common themes. They operated beyond normal rules. Yet stories always included clues about protection. Gold against the Dullahan. Stones on Deag Dhu's grave. This reveals Celtic attitudes toward evil. These forces exist. They're dangerous. But they're not omnipotent. Courage and cleverness can overcome them. But chaos and destruction weren't the only forces beyond normal life. Some spirits specialized in foretelling death itself. Why would a spirit warn you about approaching death? That question takes us deep into Celtic beliefs about fate and family. The Celts didn't see death as an absolute ending. Death was a transition. The dead moved to the other world, but maintained interest in living relatives. Death spirits weren't enemies, they were messengers. The most famous death spirit is the Banshee. The name comes from Irish Bean Sea, meaning woman of the fairy mound. So the Banshee literally means woman of the other world. Certain Irish families had banshees attached to them, passed down through generations. When death approached a family member, the banshee appeared and keened. Early descriptions don't portray banshees as evil. They're doing their job. Think of them as family retainers from the spirit world. Over time, descriptions split into two types. Some appeared as beautiful young women. Others appeared as hideous hags with streaming grey hair. The banshee's cry became legendary. Witnesses described it as the most mournful sound imaginable. Many said it triggered instinctive terror. Not every family had a banshee. They are attached primarily to old Gaelic families of high status. Having a banshee proved your lineage's importance. Now meet the Bean Nige, which translates to washer at the ford. This Scottish Highland spirit appears at river crossings, washing bloody clothes. The clothes belong to people about to die, usually in battle. Unlike the banshee, who merely announces death, the Bean Ni reveals how death will come. Warriors took Bean Ni's sightings seriously. If you sneak up and grab her, you can demand answers. She must answer honestly if properly seized. The tradition of keening at Celtic funerals connects both spirits. Professional keeners would wail over the corpse. When you heard a banshee or Bean Nish, you were hearing the other world performing this ritual in advance. Regional differences existed. In Ireland, the banshee was most prominent. In the Scottish Highlands, the Bean Ni dominated, but the core concept remained. These death spirits rarely appeared to cause harm. They were fulfilling obligations. The terror they inspired came from their message. Some families claimed their banshee as a point of pride. It proved ancestral importance. It meant the other world watched over them. Death spirits also reinforced social bonds. When the banshee keened, the community responded. Shared grief created shared identity. These spirits also taught acceptance. The warning didn't mean you could prevent death. It meant you could prepare. Now we move from spirits who announce death to those who dwell in water's depths. Why did Celts fear their own coastlines and lakes? Because water hid dangers, both physical and supernatural. Celtic lands are surrounded by coasts, carved by rivers, dotted with lochs. Water was everywhere, essential and dangerous. The Celts naturally populated these waters with spiritual beings. First, the Selkies. These beings lived as seals, but could shed their skin and walk on land as humans. In human form, Selkies were hauntingly beautiful. The stories usually involve a human finding a Selkie's shed skin and hiding it. A fisherman discovers a beautiful woman. He finds her seal skin, hides it, and marries her. Years pass. Then she finds the hidden skin. Without hesitation, she returns to the sea. What do these stories mean? On one level, they're warnings about forcing relationships. The Selkie stories also speak to the sea's pull. Now meet the Kelpies. These are water horses that appear as beautiful horses grazing near rivers. They seem tame. A traveller approaches, mounts it, and immediately the Kelpie's skin becomes adhesive. The horse plunges into the water and drowns them. The stories served practical purposes. They kept children away from treacherous waters. They explained drowning deaths. But Kelpies also embodied something deeper. They represented nature's deceptive face. What looks beautiful can kill you. Traditional protections included recognizing certain signs. Hooves that pointed backward. Water plants in the Frithicatitsi mane, cold skin. Each Wisgo represents a more violent variant. These spirits inhabited sea lochs, They were more aggressive, actively hunting victims. They'd eat their victims, leaving only the liver. The distinction mattered. Kelpies in freshwater rivers were dangerous but predictable. Each Wisgen Sea lochs were savage. Recorded folklore lists over 400 Scottish lochs with spirit-related legends. Nearly every significant body of water had its associated spirit. Lakes and wells were sacred. People made sacrifices or left gifts. Archaeological evidence shows this practice continued for centuries. Many drowned bodies were interpreted as victims of spirit trickery. This interpretation provided psychological comfort. Your loved one didn't die from foolishness. They fell to supernatural forces. But water spirits weren't entirely hostile. Some could be befriended. These stories balanced the horror with hope. The changeability of water spirits mirrors water itself. Calm one moment, deadly the next. Next, we'll meet spirits who brought mischief rather than death. What happens when spirits get bored? The Celts knew the answer. Chaos, pranks, and occasional tragedy. Tricksters occupy a special place in Celtic folklore. They're not evil. They're not helpful. They exist in between, sometimes helping humans, sometimes harming them. Start with the puka. This spirit is a powerful shapeshifter who can appear as a horse, dog, goat, rabbit, or human. The puka's nature is fundamentally ambiguous. Some nights, it might lead lost travelers to safety. Other nights, it might lead them into bogs. Most commonly, pukas appeared as black horses with glowing yellow eyes. They'd offer rides. Whether the ride ended in adventure or disaster depended on puka's mood. One legend tells of a man who rode a puka all night, speaking to it politely. At dawn, the puka returned him safely home and promised to protect his family forever. Pukas is particularly associated with Samhain. People left offerings, a share of the harvest. This practice was called the puka's share. Farmers who failed to do this found their remaining harvest mysteriously spoiled. Now meet the cluricorn. This spirit guards wine cellars and drinks heavily. They're perpetually drunk and fiercely protective of their chosen homes. A cluricorn would attach itself to a household's wine stores. If the family treated him well, he protected the cellar. But cross a cluricorn and disaster followed. The interesting part, you couldn't get rid of a cluricorn once he'd claimed your home. Families who moved found the spirit already waiting. One story tells of a family loading their belongings. Before the father could speak, a voice from a barrel called out, "We're moving." The third major trickster is the Lianan Side, which translates to fairy lover. This spirit appears as a beautiful woman who offers inspiration to artists. She becomes their muse. But there's a price. The Lianan Side drains her lover's life force. The artist creates magnificent work while slowly dying. This reflects real observations. Many great artists live intensely and die young. The Celts explained this pattern through the Lianan Side. These trickster spirits shared common themes. They operated beyond normal moral categories. They responded to respect, cleverness, and proper offerings. Trickster stories also provided entertainment. Not every folklore tale dealt with death and destruction. Offerings to tricksters were more like protection money. You weren't asking for aid. You were hoping they'd bother someone else. The ambiguity of tricksters mirrors life's ambiguity. The puka who destroys your crops tonight might warn you about storms tomorrow. From tricksters, we move to nobility. Not all spirits were chaotic or dangerous. What happened to the old gods when new beliefs arrived? The Celts had an answer. They became the fairy folk, retreating underground but remaining powerful. Before Christianity reached Celtic lands, the Tuatha De Danann were gods. These divine beings shaped Ireland, ruled it, and brought civilization. Then came conflict and withdrawal. The Tuatha De Danann withdrew from the visible world. They went underground into the hollow hills, the Seed. That word seed means both the mound itself and the fairy folk dwelling within. The Tuatha De Danann became the Aos Side, the people of the mounds. As Christianity spread, missionaries couldn't completely erase the old gods, so the church adapted. The old gods became fairies, lesser spirits, but the Side retained their power. They were still radiant, immortal, skilled in magic. Engus Og, whose name means young Engus, was god of youth and love. He owned a Brúna Boina, known today as Newgrange. Stories describe him pining for a woman seen only in dreams. On Samhain, he transformed himself into a swan and flew away with her. Brigid stands as one of the most important Celtic deities. She was goddess of poetry, healing, and smithcraft. Sacred flames burned in her honor. When Christianity arrived, Brigid became St. Brigid. The church couldn't eliminate her, so they canonized her. The Dagda, whose name means the good god, served as chief. He had a massive club and owned a cauldron that never emptied. He controlled the weather and crops. These major figures led the Side courts, with countless lesser nobles filling out their ranks. The Side lived in mounds throughout Ireland and Scotland. Legend described vast underground palaces, brilliantly lit, filled with music and feasting. People approaching these mounds performed rituals. You didn't just walk up and demand entrance. You made offerings. You asked permission. Some mortals claim to have entered and returned. Their stories describe wonders, but also warn of dangers. Time displacement meant returning to find everyone dead. The Side had rules for interacting with humans. They valued courtesy, bravery, and artistic skill. Show these qualities and they might reward you. Changeling legends connect to the Side. Supposedly, fairies sometimes stole human babies, leaving fairy children in their place. The Side also featured in tales about musicians. A mortal with exceptional skill might spend a night with the fairies, learning their music. The nobility of the Side contrasted with cruder spirits. The Side were aristocrats, beautiful, powerful, cultured, but also proud and dangerous. Seasonal festivals maintained relationships with the Side. At Samhain and Beltane, the veil thinned and the Side processed between their mounds. Iron particularly affected the Side. They couldn't tolerate it. People hung horseshoes over doors. They wore iron nails. The transformation of gods into fairies shows how folklore adapts and survives. From these noble courts, we move to spirits without homes or nobility. What happens to those who die without proper burial? The Celts believed such souls couldn't rest. Not all dead passed peacefully to the other world. Some got stuck. These became the restless dead, wandering between worlds. The Celts believed proper burial was essential, not just laying the body in the ground, but performing correct rituals. Without these, the spirit remained attached. The Slua represents perhaps the most terrifying category. The name means the host. These were unforgiven dead who flew through the night sky in great flocks, seeking to steal souls. The Slua appeared from the west. They moved like dark clouds, sometimes glimpsed as shadowy forms. They whispered to dying people. Protection against the slua required keeping west-facing windows closed when someone was dying. The slua also served as explanation. Strange sounds in the night sky. The host passing overhead. Derg Du was a wronged woman whose spirit couldn't rest. Each year she rose to hunt men. She fed on blood, but her motivation was vengeance. The only protection was piling stones on her grave. Communities would check her grave regularly. Iron and salt provided general protection against most restless dead. Salt had purifying properties. Circles of salt could trap spirits. These substances were common, accessible to everyone. Protection wasn't limited to the wealthy. Burial practices reflected the fear of restless dead. Bodies were laid out properly, washed, dressed. Coins were placed on the eyes. The wake served multiple purposes. It gave community members chance to pay respects. It also ensured the dead person was really dead. Wakes included food, drink, storytelling, even games. The Celts believed celebrating life honored the dead. Crossroads held special significance. Suicides were buried at crossroads to prevent their spirits from returning home. Ghost lights over marshes were interpreted as restless spirits. Science now understands these as natural gas igniting. But the Celtic explanation made sense. Stories of ghosts haunting specific locations always trace back to improper burial or unfinished business. These beliefs created interesting social effects. Don't murder someone, or their ghost will haunt you. They also provided comfort to victims of injustice. You might not get justice in life, but the victim's ghost would ensure justice eventually. Tales of restless dead served cautionary purposes. Don't wander graveyards at night. Don't disrespect the dead. The line between protective ancestor spirits and dangerous restless dead was thin. The difference lay in how they died and how the living treated them. From individual restless spirits, we moved to the time when boundaries between worlds dissolved entirely. Why did Celts fear and celebrate the same night? Because Samhain represented both ending and beginning, death and renewal. Samhain marked the Celtic New Year. The date, October 31st to November 1st, fell exactly between autumn equinox and winter solstice. The harvest was complete. Winter approached. The Celts divided the year into two main parts, the light half and the dark half. Samhain opened the dark half. The veil between the living world and the other world was thinnest on Samhain night. Spirits could cross easily. This made Samhain simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. Bonfires were essential. Every community lit great fires on Samhain Eve. Fire provided light against spiritual darkness. People drove cattle between two bonfires to cleanse them. The fires also had social functions. Everyone gathered around them. The community came together. Disguises formed another protection strategy. People wore costumes made from animal skins. They darkened their faces. The logic: if spirits saw something strange, they might not recognize a human. This practice directly evolved into modern Halloween costumes. Food and drink were left out for visiting spirits. A plate set at the table for deceased family members. Milk and bread left on the doorstep. This practice was called the Puka's share. The logic made perfect sense. Spirits would return to their former homes on Samhain. If you welcomed them, they'd bless your house. Some households performed elaborate rituals. They cleaned thoroughly. They set places at the table. They left doors unlocked. Divination was especially powerful on Samhain. The thin veil meant seeing the future became easier. People used various methods, examining animal entrails, interpreting smoke patterns, cracking nuts. Young people performed love divination. Would they marry? Who would they marry? They peeled apples and threw the peel over their shoulders. Sacrifice on Samhain involved both animals and harvest goods. The Celts burned offerings in the bonfires. These sacrifices thanked the spirits for the completed harvest. The extinction and rekindling of fires held deep symbolism. Before Samhain, every hearth fire was extinguished. Then the Druids lit a new fire. From this new sacred fire, every household relit their hearths. This practice emphasized the community's interconnection. You literally carried the same fire as your neighbors. Games and contests occurred at Samhain gatherings. Horse racing, boxing, wrestling. These provided entertainment, but also served social purposes. The darkness and danger of Samhain coexisted with celebration. This duality reflected the Celtic worldview. Modern Halloween preserves remarkable amounts of Samhain tradition. Trick-or-treating echoes the offerings left for spirits. Costumes descend from disguises worn for protection. Even the date remains exactly the same. The Christian Church tried to replace Samhain with All Saints' Day, but the old beliefs persisted. Understanding Samhain reveals how the Celts integrated spiritual beliefs into practical life. The festival organized the calendar, structured social interactions, and maintained connection with ancestors. The festival also shows Celtic attitudes toward death and change. Samhain represented death, of the year, of the harvest season. But that death was also birth. From this purely Celtic festival, we move to the collision of belief systems. What happens when a new religion meets old spirits? The answer reveals how beliefs transform while elements persist. Christianity arrived in Celtic lands gradually, starting around the 5th century. It spread through missionaries and slow cultural absorption. This gradual process created a hybrid system. The Church faced a practical problem. Celts had deep relationships with their spirits and gods. You couldn't simply declare these things didn't exist. The solution was reinterpretation rather than elimination. Take Cernunnos, the horned god. He was depicted with stag antlers, surrounded by animals. He represented nature and fertility. Christian missionaries saw those horns and made an immediate connection. Satan. Cernunnos became demonic in Christian teaching. Medieval art depicted devils with antlers, resembling Cernunnos exactly. This was deliberate strategy, but the transformation wasn't complete. People still left offerings at ancient sites. The name changed, but a being persisted. Now consider the opposite process, elevation to sainthood. Some Celtic deities became Christian saints. Bridget provides the clearest example. Bridget was a major goddess. The Church couldn't eliminate her, so they canonized her instead. Saint Bridget supposedly lived in the 5th and 6th centuries. Her feast day, February 1st, exactly matched pagan Imbolc. Her sacred fire continued burning. Her associations transferred intact. The two Bridgets, pagan and Christian, were functionally identical. Same powers, same locations, just different theological frameworks. This syncretism appears across Celtic lands. Saints whose lives contained obvious mythological elements. Saints whose feast days matched pagan festivals. Fairies provide another example. The Church couldn't eliminate fairy belief, so the Church relegated fairies to an ambiguous category, not divine, not demonic, but real and potentially dangerous. Church teaching claimed fairies were either fallen angels, spirits of unbaptized children, deceptive demons, or natural creatures of lesser importance. This ambiguity served everyone's purposes. The Church acknowledged fairy existence without endorsing fairy worship. Missionaries and monks who documented Celtic myths filtered them through Christian morality. They recorded the stories, but added commentary. This created fascinating documents. Various manuscript collections contain pagan mythology preserved by Christian scribes. Oral traditions preserved older versions alongside Christian interpretations. An old storyteller might tell one version to a priest and a different version to grandchildren. Sacred sites underwent physical transformation. Springs dedicated to goddesses received chapels. Standing stones got crosses carved on them. This layering is still visible today. Visit any ancient Celtic site, and you'll likely find Christian elements added to pre-Christian structures. The blending created unique folklore, stories where St. Patrick confronts druids, tales where fairies acknowledge Christ's power but continue existing. Folk Catholicism in Celtic regions retained strong pre-Christian elements for centuries. Holy wells where people left offerings, patron saint days that matched old festivals. This tolerance had practical roots. Rural priests often came from local communities. They grew up with these traditions. For them, both were real. Modern observers often view this blending as corruption or destruction, but the people living through it probably didn't see any contradiction. The transformation of pagan spirits into Christian frameworks shows religion's practical nature. Belief systems adapt or die. This process of adaptation continues. Modern neo-pagan movements try to reconstruct pre-Christian Celtic religion. Meanwhile, Christian practice in Celtic regions still carries pre-Christian elements. A farmer might attend church while also refusing to disturb a fairy fort. Understanding this transformation reveals how folklore functions. It's not static. It responds to changes, but it retains core elements. The spirits didn't die when Christianity arrived. They changed names, shifted categories, but they remain present. From noble courts and transformed gods, let's return to the everyday. Why would spirits do your housework? Because the Celts understood that protection and service could flow both ways. Not all spirits lurked in dark forests. Some preferred the warmth of human homes. Brownies stand as the most famous household helpers. These small spirits worked through the night while everyone slept. You'd wake to find floors swept, dishes washed. But brownies had strict requirements. They worked for offerings, not orders. Leave out cream, bread, honey. Never call it payment. Brownies despised being treated like servants. The relationship was delicate. Give them clothing as a gift, and they'd leave immediately, offended. Stories tell of families losing their brownies. A farmer's wife left out a new shirt. The next morning, she found it torn and heard, "Given shirt and given shoes, Brownie now must bid adieu." Now meet the Gruagash. This Highland Scottish spirit protected livestock, particularly cattle. Farmers who wanted Gruagash protection poured milk into a hollow stone at the barn. In return, the Gruagach watched over the herd. Cows stayed healthy. Neglect the Gruagach and problems erupted. Cattle sickened. Milk soured. Hearth spirits formed another category. The hearth was both practically and spiritually vital. The hearth spirit resided in the flames. Feed the fire, keep it clean, and the spirit blessed your home. Some families performed daily rituals, a prayer before lighting the morning fire, a small offering placed in the flames. These protective spirits shared common requirements. They demanded respect, not worship. In return, they provided services that made survival easier. Disturbing these beings brought consequences. At minimum, they'd leave. Sometimes they'd transform from helper to tormentor. Offerings followed specific patterns. Always simple foods, never meat. The offerings had to be genuine excess. Children growing up with spirit traditions learned valuable lessons. Your actions have witnesses. Small kindnesses compound into larger blessings. The psychological impact probably encouraged better domestic management. If you think a brownie watches, you might clean more thoroughly. These spirits also provided comfort during hardship. Knowing you had supernatural assistance helped. From protective home spirits, we move outward to the spirits inhabiting the land itself. Why would Celts greet a hill before climbing it? Because they believed the landscape itself was alive and aware. The Celts didn't see land as inert matter. Mountains, hills, stones, springs, all possess consciousness. Romans had a term for this, genius loci, spirit of place. But Celtic understanding went deeper. The land was spirit made physical. Take the hill of Tara. This wasn't just elevated ground. It was the sacred centre of Irish kingship. The hill itself chose who could rule. The stone of destiny sat on Tara. Legend claimed it roared when the true king touched it. Approaching Tara required respect. Travellers performed small rituals, a spoken greeting, a gesture of acknowledgement. Every hill, every mountain had its spirit. Mountains were particularly powerful beings, ancient and slow but aware. Stone circles represented another category. The Celts believed certain locations held natural power. Stones placed in circles channeled and amplified the inherent energy. Each stone functioned individually and as a part of the whole. Disturbing one stone disrupted the entire pattern. Archaeological evidence shows continuous use of these sites over thousands of years. The sites retained sacredness across belief system changes. Wells and springs represented points where the other world broke through. Water emerging from earth crossed boundaries. People approached sacred wells with elaborate protocols. You circled the well 3 or 9 times. You spoke your petition. You left an offering. Healing wells had particularly strong spirits. People travelled great distances seeking cures. Clootie wells still exist across Celtic lands. Faded ribbons hang from trees surrounding springs. Standing stones held their own consciousness. Menhirs marked significant spots. Some standing stones were said to move. They'd walk to water at midnight, or rotate, or dance at Samhain. People claim to witness stone movement. Folklore contains endless stories about people who tried moving ancient stones, but those who disturbed sacred stones faced consequences. Tools broke. Accidents occurred. The land itself revolted. Prehistoric monuments like New Grange presented special cases. The Celts didn't claim to have built them. They attributed them to gods. This made them even more sacred. The genius loci of such places was overwhelming. These were vast consciousnesses that had witnessed millennia. People felt it physically, the sense of presence, of being observed. Travellers had specific behaviours for entering sacred territories. You didn't wear shoes. You moved clockwise. You remained silent or spoke only prescribed words. Certain trees functioned as land spirits. An oak that had stood for centuries became more than a plant. It was a witness, a conscious presence. Mountains had the most powerful land spirits. Peaks represented thresholds between earth and sky. Climbing a sacred mountain meant ascending toward divine presence. Seasonal rituals often occurred at specific landscape features. Beltane fires on certain hilltops. Samhain ceremonies at particular stones. The calendar and geography intertwined. This geographic spirituality meant Celts never felt homeless. Wherever you were, you stood in relationship with conscious land. From spirits of place, we moved to spirits who operate outside space and time. Why did warriors pray to crows before battle? Because certain spirits existed outside normal time, seeing past, present, and future simultaneously. The Celts didn't view time as linear. They saw it as cyclical, interconnected. Certain spirits moved through these temporal layers freely. Morrigan stands as the most powerful prophetic spirit. Her name means Phantom Queen. She appeared as three sisters sometimes, one entity sometimes, always associated with war and death. The Morrigan often took crow or raven form. Battlefields attracted her. She'd perch on trees, watching warriors prepare for combat. Heroes encountered her before major battles. She might appear as a beautiful woman, testing their courage. She might appear as a washing woman at a ford, revealing who would die. The famous hero Cu Chulainn met Morrigan multiple times. She offered him love. He refused rudely. She cursed him. Later, before his final battle, he saw her washing his armor. He knew then he wouldn't survive. This reveals Celtic understanding of fate. It wasn't predetermined in the sense of removing choice, but certain outcomes already existed ahead. The washer at the ford revealed not just that death comes, but how and when. She washed the clothes of those about to die. If you approached her correctly, you could demand prophecy. She had to answer 3 questions truthfully. Bran the Blessed represents another prophetic figure. This giant king was mortally wounded. He ordered his companions to cut off his head, which remained alive. For 87 years, Bran's severed head provided prophecy. The talking head motif suggests consciousness exists separately from the body. Prophecy comes from this liminal state. Druids functioned as prophetic intermediaries. They studied celestial patterns, natural signs, and animal behavior. They read omens in bird flight, weather changes, dreams. Before major decisions, kings consulted druids. The druids would perform divination, examining animal entrails, interpreting smoke patterns, casting lots. Prophetic dreams held special significance. If a person dreamed something 3 times, it was considered a true prophecy. The Celtic concept of time as cyclical meant prophecy wasn't predicting something entirely new. It was recognizing patterns repeating. The sovereignty goddess tradition connected to prophecy. The land itself, personified as goddess, chose who could rule it. If he ruled justly, the land prospered. If he ruled poorly, the land revolted. Omens before battle included ravens gathering, unusual animal behavior, and sudden weather changes. Warriors paid attention to these signs. The difference between omen and prophecy was subtle. An omen showed present spiritual conditions. A prophecy revealed future outcomes. Prophetic spirits didn't control fate. They revealed it. The Morrigan didn't kill Cu Chulainn. She saw his death approaching through his own choices. This view of prophecy preserves human agency while acknowledging larger patterns. You choose freely, and some outcomes are inevitable. Understanding prophetic spirits reveals Celtic wisdom about accepting what can't be changed while still acting courageously. From spirits who saw time's patterns, we moved to the humans who learned to communicate with them. Who were the people brave enough to speak directly with spirits? The Druids weren't just priests. They were the living bridge between mortal and divine worlds. Druids occupied unique positions in Celtic society. They were judges, healers, teachers, astronomers, and spirit mediators all combined. Their training took 20 years minimum. They memorized enormous amounts of oral tradition because writing sacred knowledge was forbidden. Why refuse writing? Because words on page were dead, living memory kept, knowledge alive. Roman sources provide our main written descriptions. Romans recognized Druidic knowledge was genuine and sophisticated. Druids conducted rituals in sacred groves. Oak groves held special significance. The oak tree symbolized strength, connection between earth and sky. The famous mistletoe ceremony occurred in oak groves. Druids used golden sickles to cut mistletoe growing on oak trees. Gold because it doesn't corrode. Druid training involved learning to communicate with various spirit categories: tree spirits, water spirits, land spirits, ancestors, gods. Each required specific approaches. Part of training meant learning proper offerings for each spirit type. Earth spirits wanted grain and honey. Water spirits preferred coins thrown into rivers. But offerings alone weren't enough. Intention mattered. The Druid had to approach in the correct mental and spiritual state. Divination formed another crucial skill. Druids used multiple methods. They read patterns in bird flight. Different birds, different messages. They examined animal entrails after ritual sacrifice. The organ's condition provided information. Smoke divination involved burning specific woods and interpreting the smoke's behavior. They cast lots, threw carved sticks, and read the patterns. The Celtic version involved ogham staves. Dream interpretation was crucial. Druids trained to remember dreams clearly. They also induced prophetic dreams through fasting or sleeping in sacred locations. Celestial observation formed another Druid specialty. They tracked the sun, moon, planets, and stars. Archaeological evidence shows structures like Newgrange aligned precisely with winter solstice sunrise. Druids guided tribal decisions based on spiritual omens and celestial events. Should we plant these fields? Should we attack these enemies? The Druid performed divination. This gave them enormous political power. Kings needed Druid approval. Laws required Druid interpretation. Roman conquest specifically targeted Druids. The famous massacre at Anglesey in 60 CE aimed to eliminate British Druid strongholds. After Roman conquest and Christian conversion, formal Druid orders disappeared. But their knowledge didn't vanish. It went underground, preserved in folk practices. Medieval Irish monks were often trained in Druidic knowledge before conversion. They wrote down what had been oral. The Druid represents humanity's possibility of communicating consciously with spiritual forces, not through blind faith, but through disciplined study. From those who communicated professionally with spirits, we moved to spirits created through human tragedy. What happens when someone dies with bitter rage in their heart? The Celts believed that emotion didn't die with the body. Cursed spirits arose from betrayal, broken vows, or violent death. These weren't ordinary ghosts. These were entities bound by unfinished business. The White Lady of Kinsale provides a classic example. She was a bride whose groom fell to his death from a castle tower on their wedding night. She haunts the tower, appearing before deaths in the family line. Her white dress symbolizes both her bridal state, forever suspended, and her ghostly nature. White is the color of death in Celtic tradition. The White Lady doesn't actively harm anyone. She's an omen. But her continued existence speaks to trauma's power. Lady Fanshaw's ghost follows similar patterns. She appears before deaths in the Fanshawe family line. Different accounts give different origin stories. These family ghosts raise interesting questions. Are they protecting the family or cursing it? Celtic thought would say both simultaneously. The Celtic concept of gaze adds another layer. A gaze was a personal taboo. Breaking gaze brought misfortune or death. Cú Chulainn had multiple geasa. He couldn't refuse food from a woman. He couldn't eat dog meat. During his final days, an old woman offered him a roasted dog. He was trapped. He ate the dog. His strength left him. And he died. Violated geasa could create vengeful spirits. If someone forced you to break your sacred obligation, your spirit might haunt them. Curses themselves were viewed as living forces. When a powerful person cursed someone, the curse took on independent existence. Lifting curses required specific rituals. Sometimes only the person who cast it could remove it, but some curses were permanent. The power of curses came from cosmic justice. If genuine injustice occurred, the universe recognized it. This meant false curses often backfired. If you cursed someone who didn't actually wrong you, the curse returned threefold. Battlefield ghosts formed another category. Warriors who died in rage, whose bodies weren't recovered, couldn't rest. They haunted battlefields. The solution was proper funeral rites, even years after death. Speak their names, honor their courage. This sometimes releases the spirits. Murder victims who couldn't identify their killers became vengeful spirits. They'd haunt the murder site or follow the murderer. Justice and spiritual peace connected directly. As long as the murderer went unpunished, the victim's spirit remained restless. Betrayed lovers created particularly bitter spirits. A woman seduced and abandoned might curse the man with her dying breath. These stories reinforced social contracts. Don't break promises. Don't seduce without intent to commit. The emphasis on proper burial throughout these stories reveals its importance. An unburied body created spiritual problems. This created social obligation. Even your enemies deserved burial. Even criminals needed basic rights. Salt and iron remained primary protections against vengeful spirits. Create a circle of salt. Carry an iron nail. But protection only worked if you were innocent. If the spirit had legitimate grievances, no protection helped. You had to make amends. Understanding cursed and vengeful spirits reveals Celtic's justice concepts. Wrongs created spiritual imbalance. That imbalance persisted until corrected. The unforgiving spirits also reflected psychological truth. Guilt haunts, trauma persists. The Celts externalized these internal experiences as spirits. The sophistication lies in recognizing that some wrongs can't be undone. These spirits persist because certain injuries are permanent. Understanding these spirits completes our survey of the Celtic supernatural world. From the connected cosmos through elemental spirits, dark forces, death omens, water dwellers, tricksters, noble cedar, wandering dead, festival times, Christian transformation, protective helpers, land consciousness, prophetic beings, druid communication, and finally to spirits created through human cruelty and sorrow. The Celtic spirit world was a sophisticated system for understanding existence, encoding wisdom, maintaining social order, explaining suffering, providing comfort, encouraging virtue, and keeping communities connected across generations and between visible and invisible worlds. These spirits, whether understood as literal beings or powerful symbols, served essential functions. They made the universe less lonely and less random. They provided frameworks for processing death, injustice, fear, and hope. They connected people to land, ancestors, cosmic patterns, and each other.